Hello, my fellow Westorians. Welcome to a special midweek episode. It's Thursday. We usually do our midweek episodes on Wednesday, which is the real midweek for the weekday grind, I suppose. But hey, we do it when we can. We had a special reason to do this episode, and well, here we are. Spoiler free, this episode will be. We're covering the life of Viserys I, which is now over in show canon. Book canon, of course, it's been over for a while. We've always been able to discuss that. So, yeah, we won't be having any spoilers. Sean is here with us.
Any spoilers for future episodes or for the books?
Yeah.
Obviously, spoilers for episode 8 of House of the Dragon are implicit here.
Yes, definitely.
And 7 and 6 and
Yes.
Not 4, though. We're not going to talk about 4.
Yeah, we're just going to skip that one entirely. No spoilers for episodes 9 or 10 or anything else to come in Fire and Blood. We'll keep it all to just what's happened. A little look ahead only, but only a little stuff that we're very clear on. Sean, what are you drinking today? I'm drinking a naked protein drink. I've got this green. You can't tell it's green because I've got it in a purple. This is a Balerion steel cup, actually.
I think you should pour it all over yourself and prove to us.
Just dump it on my head.
You got slimed.
It is green. Yeah, it would be appropriate for that, but I think I will not drench myself during the stream.
Berry.
The berry protein naked drink.
Very nice.
Mixed with raspberry sparkling ice and classic Mountain Dew.
That's just kind of like a standard thing for you now. It's like, this used to be weird. Now it's like, that's a normal Sean drink. It's still weird, like, out of context, but for you, it's like, pretty normal.
Soon.
You're going to make it all normal for everyone. Yeah. All right, so yeah, make sure to check out our synopsis videos each week. They're always a good way to keep yourself locked into the discussions. But this, of course, will be covering several weeks of discussion and Fire and Blood. Thanks to patrons like Jeff Gnarly the Long Snapper, History of Westeros' First Sword, and Dragon Lord Eric the Evening Shade, Lord of the Groves, and Defender of Stygi, Rider of Ixodes Scapularis the Bloodthirsty, a dragon with purple scales and wings, with the red underside, black horns, and green eyes. I like the black horns and green eyes, kind of like in concert there, the blacks and the greens represented. You can send any questions you may have about this topic, or if you want to send tributes to Paddy Considine, the actor. That is a big reason why we're doing this. I think that the performance that he dropped on all of us was a bit of a surprise. Only reason it wasn't a surprise was George and some other people sort of told us all it was coming, how impressive he was, how he not only made the show better, but was an excellent change to the way George had envisioned the role. And I think that's a good place for us to start thinking about the difference between a king who has a deep personal impact on the people around him, but not a big political impact, right? As far as kings go, that's kind of why he's a little skippable historically in some ways. But looking at him from the personal level brings us back to understanding why his personal political impact was the way it was, why it was minimal, or why it should have been perhaps more aggressive in a lot of ways. So the reasons that he's forgotten historically are reasons why we should pay attention to him, because the things he didn't do are really important. Those are things historically that if you were put in the real world, they would stand as important. Like, well, this king didn't prevent this from happening. And I think that's a mistake we make a lot of times in history. Take, for example, Richard the Lionheart, famous king of England, well remembered by a lot of people, but modern historians and some from back then are like, this guy, he's popular because he was a war hero. He was a bad king, though. And the guy after him, King John, who was also a bad king, gets the brunt of Richard's badness. Like, all the things Richard did poorly are kind of dumped on John, who did his own set of bad things. But John was gifted a horrible reign, like a realm with no money, because Richard spent it all on the Crusades. But John gets blamed for that, too. Which is too bad, because, like I said, there's plenty of things to blame him for beside that. But he shouldn't be blamed for the things that were really Richard's fault. This is the opposite. Viserys had a great realm. He came into wealth and power, and things were at their best. And, well, he didn't really do much with that, which some people can overlook that. But I think that's a problem. Sean, what do you think? What's your opening statement here?
there's a lot of different angles, but my default is, hey, great. I would rather someone not do anything than start wars.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That, he does deserve some credit for that.
I think most historical figures are known because they played some role in a war. And I wish I knew about the people who played some role in building hospitals and, I don't know, designing the wheel and other things that have immensely helped humanity, not destroyed and held humanity back. And there's pros and cons to Viserys' character. But I think the keeping out of war outweighs most of the cons, except some of the cons are things he should have done that because he didn't, we end up getting war post him.
Yeah,
you know
exactly.
What I mean?
So it's kind of hard. It is a little tricky because you're like, well, he didn't start it, but he kind of did. He kind of set it up. Like he didn't kick it off, but he put all the pieces in order.
Like, Alexander the Great also sort of came into power, right? Like he was this young kid, and maybe he had this sort of ambition and was well educated or whatever, but his father built this great army. He had all these generals around. They were already on the move. You know what I mean? Like the battle plans were drawn. He was just a person stuck in a place and got the credit, or, in my opinion, should get the blame. Like he gets this credit for being this great conqueror. But what that means is entire villages were slaughtered. People were enslaved. There was a massively destructive thing that he did, as most quote unquote great leaders from history were and did. So, overall, I think I'm going to come out with Viserys being on the plus side, probably by a good margin. Honestly.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, because the bar is low, is kind of what you're saying here. Like the bar is really low, and not only is the bar low, but our whole historical viewpoint, like the basic things we use to judge a lot of historical figures in A Song of Ice and Fire in the real world, are a little screwed up because of what you said. Like, not because our values are necessarily off, although I'm sure they are in some ways, but because the people who wrote about these figures at the time glorified them in ways we wouldn't, but we don't necessarily unpack that, and we just kind of like, oh yeah, they say he's great, we think he's great too. Or they don't bring up the criticisms, like a lot of the texts on Alexander the Great don't criticize him the way like you just did, which I agree with your criticisms, but if you have every single history written about him and they all just praise how great he is, it's hard to go against that. As a student of history, you're not like, as a 19-year-old, when I was first reading about him, I wasn't going to go against that. I was just like, everybody likes this guy. It wasn't until I was much older that I was like, why do people like him so much? He's certainly interesting. And I was one of the biggest fans of Alexander, that I knew at the time. Now I'm still a fan of that history, but I'm not like, this was not a great guy. He was great in the sense that he had a great impact, but he wasn't like, really. It's
impressive person. What he and I don't know, Genghis Khan and characters like that. It's impressive what they did, and it's impactful what they did. It definitely shaped the world that we know today. But it's also awful what they did, and it's interesting too that I guarantee you, it's not like they're warmongers, but everything else in their life was nice and appropriate. I guarantee you they were awful in a bunch of other ways.
Yeah.
And someone like Gandhi, who did something very impressive, liberated a country of 1 billion people through peace, but he had some problems in his personal life. But those get focused on a lot, and it almost to the point of discrediting everything else he did. Why doesn't that happen with Alexander the Great or whoever else?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. No matter which way it comes, there's always people who are going to praise things that we disagree with, and sometimes we're going to be like, why would they ever praise that? But yeah, it's really difficult to look at people who had such a massive impact and to come up with a final grade, right? Like it's almost silly to even try that.
Final
grade, because like how can you? For one thing, we can't even take into account everything. For other things, it's just like we're inserting so much of our own personal opinion when we do that. It's not very universal. Dean Brown sends a super chat, says, I've loved Paddy across British TV and film for years. So happy he's getting this global recognition. His Instagram post was beautiful. R.I.P. King Viserys. We have that Instagram post to read a bit later, so if y'all missed it, we'll share it. And it was beautiful. And yeah, he has been in a lot of stuff. We'll have a little more about his personal details later as well. But this is a new level for him of fame, most likely. Probably true for a lot of the actors in this show, but a few of them were pretty big already. But even Matt Smith is rising to new levels after this. Is he probably the most famous person in the show, Matt Smith?
Yeah, I would say Matt Smith.
I
would say Matt Smith is the most famous, and then probably Olivia Cook next.
Okay. Yeah, that's also kind of hard.
But she's not. I don't even think she's even on close to the same level as him in terms of name recognition or having been in a huge franchise. Like, she's been in some big movies, but no, I think he's like it by a pretty big margin.
Yeah, there's some people like Millie Alcock who had really not done anything famous before, and she's now all of a sudden like, ooh, look how good she is. But we're not talking about her today. Maybe some other day. So here's a quote to get us started. This is the introduction to Viserys' reign in Fire and Blood. Sean, you want to read this one?
Sure. Hold on, let me make sure I've got this right. Many consider the reign of King Viserys I to represent the apex of Targaryen power in Westeros. Beyond a doubt, there were more lords and princes claiming the blood of the dragon than at any other time, than at any period before or since. Though the Targaryens had continued their traditional practice of marrying brother to sister, uncle to niece, and cousin to cousin whenever possible, there had been important matches outside the royal family, the fruit of which would play important roles in the war to come. There were more dragons than ever before as well. And several of the she-dragons were regularly producing clutches of eggs.
So that's basically three statements there. One about the apex of Targaryen power and how many Targaryens there were. One would be how that spread out, or two would be how that spread outside House Targaryen. Once there's more Targaryens, there's more marriages outside the house, and some of that power starts to spread. That's a big factor here, in particular the Hightowers, the Velaryons, and to a lesser extent, houses like the Baratheons, and then anyone associated with them. But those are the main ones. And then, of course, more dragons than ever. That is part of the problem. With more dragons, you need more riders. There aren't always enough Targaryens. You have the problem of, well, should we even allow that? Well, what do we do with the extras? These are the things that Viserys didn't recognize as the real challenges of his life. These were new problems, or at least somewhat new problems. Maybe the Valyrians face them back in the Freehold. I don't know. But a guy like Viserys could have been equipped to deal with some of that, given his love for certain aspects of history. But maybe that aspect of history he didn't care about as much. He was more interested in like city layouts and architecture than how they were ruling and how they were handling these political problems, perhaps. But let's jump back to his early life first, just to set up the kind of personality he has. Mm-hmm. And yeah, Sean, you have something to add here?
Well, a question, and this might be difficult to answer or even too big of a tangent, but how many Targaryens were there at this moment? Say there had been some, catastrophe, some, blowing up of the Sept type moment, and all the Targaryens that we've seen on the show were all killed all at once. Is there someone else out there? Who would it fall to? Okay,
so you mean if at what time are you suggesting this? Like when he came to the throne?
Yeah, let's say the funeral for Viserys, the dragon blows up and
everyone dies.
Daemon, Rhaenyra, Corlys, that branch, all those, everyone that we've seen so far in the show.
It would have been a little difficult, given the Great Council, how few people got traction at the Great Council, but it would have quite possibly been House Baratheon. Because, so I actually did put a list here. Laenor, Laena, Rhaenys, Aemma, Rhaenyra, Daemon, Archmaester Vaegon, who helped Jaehaerys decide to do a Great Council in the first place. That was one of Jaehaerys' sons. Sarah and her children. Sarah being the one who ran off and had, became higher in concubine in Volantis and had her own children. And then House Baratheon, who formed from Orys Baratheon, who was a bastard of Aerion Targaryen, which was Aegon and Visenya and Rhaenys' father. So the Baratheons never took dragons, but they had Targaryen bastard blood, apparently, so you could argue they were part of this, but they never progressed past.
There were no marriages back into that house?
There was one.
Times?
There had been, yes, because Jaehaerys' first son, Jaehaerys and Alysanne's first son, Aemon, married Jocelyn Baratheon, and that's how we got Rhaenys. Rhaenys, the queen who never was, that she has a Baratheon mother. So she married back into the other house that was the next closest related, or even more closely related to House Targaryen than House Baratheon, which is House Velaryon, of course.
Right.
So the Baratheon half married into the Velaryons, and then they kind of made a trio, a combo trio.
It might be spoilery to push the future of that, but I have this general understanding that's why Robert had some claim.
That's correct.
There's a lot of factors. When you get to like the Game of Thrones time.
Well,
period.
it's even farther. It's even better than that because Robert and Stannis and Renly's father or grandfather had a Targaryen wife, so their reinfusion was recent in that sense. It was one of Egg's daughters that married their grandfather. So there was a fair amount at the time of his end, but it wasn't like some crazy amount. Like that wasn't some huge list, and I was mentioning ones who wouldn't be real candidates unless everyone else was wiped out. At the time of his death, it's a lot bigger. If we can jump forward, you can say Laenor in show canon is technically alive, but in book canon, he's dead. Rhaenys still alive. Rhaenyra, Daemon, Jace, Luke, Joffrey, Aegon the Younger and Aegon the Elder, Viserys, Aemond, Helena, Daeron, who is confirmed to exist. The fourth son of Alicent and Viserys does exist. He's just been in Old Town as a squire this whole time, which is book canon as well, but we haven't seen him yet. And then still the Baratheons, whatever.
Baela and Rhaena.
Oh, Baela and Rhaena, of course, yes. I meant to include them. Yes, Baela and Rhaena.
So I lost track, but that had to be more than a dozen,
yeah,
I think?
Yeah, definitely.
Now contrast that to Game of Thrones time period when Aerys is the king, Rhaegar his son,
Viserys.
Is that it?
Well, Viserys eventually.
Viserys,
and then
Dany, I guess.
But Dany was.
But that's it, right?
Yeah.
And little Rhaenys eventually, too. But yeah.
True. Yeah, and then the little Rhaegar's kids who were killed. Yeah, there were two kids there that were murdered. So there, and of course no dragons in that era either. Now in this era, there's a huge number of dragons, and really, and that's interesting because like I said, I want to go through his early life. There weren't a ton of Targaryens even in his early life. Even though his grandparents had 13 children, a lot of them were dead by the time he came of age, and a few of them were going to have kids. So he was born in 77 AC, 24 years before the Great Council. And that's important. He was the first child of Balon and Alyssa. Balon was the second child of Jaehaerys and Alysanne, Aemon being first, the one who married Jocelyn Baratheon. And Alyssa was their third born. So it was pretty straightforward Targaryen matchmaking there. But Daemon came along 4 years later. So Daemon, like I said, came along in the year 81. What's odd is his grandparents were young enough. Alysanne and Jaehaerys got married so young that they were still having kids after he was born. They had their 12th child the same year he was born. So in the year 77, or rather the year 81, the same year Daemon was born. And I'm almost glad this kid died, and that's a really cruel thing to say, but his name was Balerion. Like, we do not need a kid named
that much
Balerion.
More confusion.
Yeah, like Balerion, a Valyrian child named Balerion, who apparently, like, it would be amazing if he married a wife of House Velaryon. Yeah. Like, no thank you, George. Yeah.
I would love it if he had tamed Balerion. It was Balerion, writer of Balerion.
Oh, boy. And then
I need to clarify something here real quick.
Yeah.
Jaehaerys,
which
is Viserys' father.
Grandfather.
Okay. That's right. Okay. He had 13 kids.
Mm-hmm.
His wife, good Queen
Alysanne,
had 13 kids.
Yes. They were all together.
She should have all the statues. She's a real hero.
She does have statues. She does have some. Like, she is the most well-remembered queen of all time. So she does get maybe not enough credit because she does deserve a lot of credit. But she gets credit. She gets a lot of credit. Like Sansa thinks about her early
even Viserys in the show, he goes, those streets were not as lawless when my grandmother, was still alive and lived here. So, Viserys gave her credit as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. But they still weren't done because, like I said, Balerion was the 12th child. He died, like, the next year. And Gael was born 3 year later, like the year 84. So Viserys wouldn't have known Balerion because he only lived a year. But Gael, he may have grown up with Gael, but she was simple-minded.
This was a real situation, like with the Green Boys and Rhaenyra's kids, really, with uncles and nephews and aunts and nephews.
And Gael may have been a bit like Helena. She probably wasn't a dreamer, but she was listed as simple-minded.
Yeah, so she's neurodivergent in some way, but maybe she was a dreamer too.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, and that's kind of unfortunate that's just how it's always written, simple-minded. Like it's a catch-all for a wide variety of neurodivergence and other things that could be actually severe problems rather than just differences. We're not sure which bucket Gale belongs in truly, but they said
even in the real world,
that's what I'm saying.
100 years ago, we didn't even have good terminology or understanding of these different things.
Even if they tried harder, they wouldn't have gotten it very well accurate. Yeah, that's true. So she died at age 19, so Viserys would have remembered her death, and it would have been a big tragedy within the family. But because of her situation, they may not have been that close. Rhaenys was 3 years older than Viserys, so they probably did grow up together. So that's pretty important. They knew each other pretty well. When he says, "It's my favorite cousin," like that, we were joking about how, like, well, he don't really have a lot of cousins. But...
and his wife is his cousin, too.
Yeah, his
so,
own wife. Of course, she was technically dead by then. But still, like, it's not a complete joke. It's like, well, yeah, they did grow up together and would have been maybe close. So, yeah, Aemma was born 5 years later. I don't think that's different in show canon. Book Alicent, that's different. Book Alicent's born in the year 88, where in show canon it's more like the year 97. So that's a pretty big difference. When Viserys was 6, this is one of the few examples of there being war in his whole life. So this is one of the things maybe that like sets the stage for how he just thinks the world is, or like what he thinks his job is as king. There just wasn't much fighting during his grandfather's reign either, except at the beginning when there was still some conciliating that needed done left over from Maegor. But Jaehaerys ruled for like 60 or like 50 years, so like that, most of that was well done by the time Viserys was born. So yeah, when he was 6, Jaehaerys, Viserys' dad, and Viserys' uncle Aemon, Rhaenys' dad, all flew to fight the Dornish invasion fleet of Prince Morion, who we refer to as Prince Moron. Because he like broadcast that this was going to happen, and they're like, "You're sending ships and letting us know? Okay, we'll burn them all." And that's that. They lost 0 men. They burned all the Dornish lost nearly all of theirs, so that was no good. So
an L for the Dornish there,
which is kind of funny to think about, like how when Rhaenyra is like, "Send dragon riders, father, intimidate them with the dragon riders." He could have remembered things like this and be like, "Yeah, they really are quite intimidating." Like, I think Rhaenyra was right about that, but maybe not send her, but but the idea of sending dragons is good. In the year 92, so a good 4 years after Book Alicent was born, Aemon was killed by the Marish exiles on Tarth. We talked about that. So that's when Viserys' father becomes heir instead, and Rhaenys' father is killed. The next year is when he marries Aemma. He's 26. I'm sorry, 16. He'd have been 16 at this, and she would have been a little bit younger, I guess. And the next year, something very important happens that I think probably colors Viserys' attitude towards a lot of things and towards marriage and politics, which is the second great quarrel was resolved. The first great quarrel was between Jaehaerys and Alysanne. Both of them were. That was more about Jaehaerys' attitude towards Sarah, the daughter who went away. And he was kind of crappy about that. That's not as relevant here, but it is relevant to when Viserys said, "Oh, he would have just disowned you," to Rhaenyra after that Street of Silk incident. Related to this. But the second great quarrel is the one that really matters, because that's the one where Alysanne's like, "Okay, Rhaenys is next. Aemon died, but his son, or his heir, is Rhaenys, so she's next in line for the throne." And Jaehaerys is like, "Nah, we're gonna go with our second son instead." She did not like that. She thought it should have been the daughter. They had a 2-year fight over this, and it took one of their surviving daughters to bring them back together. Pretty famous. Viserys was an adult by this point, or at least an old teenager. So it would have been a big deal in family history, and something that he may have thought about a lot when arguing with Alicent, or when naming Rhaenyra as heir. He's like, "Well, this is what Alysanne, my grandmother, wanted," and she was probably right. So I think this absolutely matters to the attitude Viserys had towards female rulers, and maybe just women in general. Alysanne was a great example. For a lot of reasons, not just for her style of ruling, but for her forethought, which in this case, she seems to have been right. And now, to be fair, the reason they picked Balon was he was older, He was established. He was well liked. He was an adult, whereas Rhaenys was not. So there were some at least reasonably compelling reasons to choose Balon outside of for reasons that had nothing to do with gender. But it did have the very negative side effect of pushing the idea that women weren't allowed to inherit the Iron Throne, even if it wasn't official. It certainly sent that message, and that caused
problems. To the precedent.
Yes,
it added to the precedent, even if that
perceived
wasn't the
precedent. Yeah, the perceived precedent, which was. But the other precedent set was the Great Council itself, right? Which says, okay, you can choose. Choosing is viable. Just because they chose a man, the point is they chose. It wasn't just we follow these existing rules. They chose, and so if you are allowed to choose this time, then that set a precedent too. But we'll come back to that in a minute. So both times, Alysanne and Jaehaerys made up with their great quarrels, but it wasn't too long after that where Alysanne just died, sad and from losing so many of her children, and that made Jaehaerys really sad and traumatized. So Rhaenyra is born in the year 97, which is, I think, similar show and book canon. So this, and then of course that puts her nearer to Alicent's show birth. But just like in the book and show as well, Aemma had already lost 3 children before this. So they had several not children, several deaths, stillbirths, whatever, before Rhaenyra made it. And the next up was he claims Balerion. The same year he married Aemma, he claimed Balerion. Now this is really interesting too. Go ahead, Sean. You have a question?
Had he not claimed another dragon until that point?
Correct. Yeah. So he's only 17 at this point, so he's not like but that is a little older. Like you certainly see the kids tend to claim their dragons younger. Sometimes they're just born with them.
Lena said she was a late bloomer at 15.
Yeah, so Viserys is even more so that. Now this is book and show canon as well, so this isn't a deviance, or a deviation rather. So, and it's really unusual for several reasons, not just that he chose an old dragon that didn't last, and he didn't choose another one after that, but his own mother Alyssa, who also was more like Daemon and her husband, Viserys' father. So Viserys was kind of the black sheep of his immediate family. They were all the more aggressive, like adrenaline types, where he's more of the like, I don't like that. I don't like flying so much. So, but maybe that was why he did this. Okay, so here's what happens. Alyssa goes to claim her dragon, and the dragon keepers are like, you don't want Balerion. You don't want Balerion. He's old. He's slow. You want a young, quick dragon. She's like, okay, good advice. Good advice. That was 18 years ago before this. So like 18 years later, he's not gotten any faster. He's only slowed down more. So Viserys is still like, I want that one. Like, I really wonder what his thinking was. He's like, well, I actually want a slow dragon that's nice and easy, you know. I don't want some big aggressive one. So he didn't even he tells his father Balon, he's like, I don't think Balerion could have even made it to Dragonstone. That was his intent. I'm going to fly this dragon to Dragonstone. He's like, I don't think he can make it. So he just flies him 3 times around the city, and then that was about it. Like he didn't only rode him another couple times at most, if even that. Which is kind of expressed in that conversation he has with Lena, right? When she's asking him about that, and he's kind of like, I don't really want to talk about this. That's kind of like the vibe. Yeah. She keeps asking about dragons, and he's like, are we still talking about dragons? Yeah, they're dangerous.
I know I'm kind of contrarian here. Most people are watching this show because they love dragons and think they're cool, and I totally get that. But I'm on Viserys' side, man. I think they're dangerous. They're nuclear bombs. But on multiple levels, I appreciate that he wants to steer clear of them. One, just like maybe personal danger. Like the idea of claiming one is dangerous, it's scary. Like I sometimes I want to attribute things to him that maybe just aren't the case, especially since they haven't really been pointed out, Yeah. Maybe it's theoretically possible, but they haven't made a point of it. But maybe he feels obliged to keep himself safe as the king. Yeah. He doesn't want to do something reckless and get himself king and cause all this trouble.
Maybe.
He also maybe wants the Targaryens to be able to rule through their foresight and strength of character and strategic ability and economic sense and so on, not through fear. Like we should just be good leaders because we're good leaders. It doesn't matter if we have dragons or not. People should respect us because we're the royal family. It doesn't matter if we have dragons or not. They never show him push that agenda, but I wonder if it's at least in the back of his mind somewhere.
And he wasn't great with his foresight and all those other things. But I still agree with you. Like that is a thing that would be good to express. Like, look, it's not just our dragons. Don't mess with us because we have dragons. But also we're good leaders because
But no, I agree with you, Sean. I think that Viserys' opinion on dragons and their use and his healthy caution or whatever wariness of them is a very positive character trait for me. One that I commend him for, actually.
Yeah, and I really wonder what drove him to make this choice in the first place. Was he he was young, he was 17, maybe he's trying to impress his new wife or impress his family or just do what was expected of him. But he decided it wasn't for him. He's like, I didn't like that. I didn't like flying.
Me, I'm a sucker for the idea. I'm a sucker for the idea that connecting with your dragon is a very strong bond, and that Balerion would have some messed up memories or an older brain. Like, there's a million angles you could take for that, but I really do like the idea that Viserys, once he bonded with Balerion, he was like, oh, I'm getting these terrible dreams about burning things, or I'm like haunted by this dragon doesn't have a great memory anymore,
or just being old, or
just
like I'm
just
old and want to
decrepit.
relax, and he's like, I'm old, I want to relax. Like, wait, I'm not old. Where did I get that feeling from?
Yeah,
like,
you're
is my dragon sending me these thoughts?
Yeah,
he's like, I'm 17,
that.
I'm not old.
Maybe he was mentally or emotionally disturbed by the bonding with that particular dragon.
Yeah, that's entirely possible.
Could be for other characters in the lore also.
That's very.
I wonder if maybe he just had a moment like little Aemon did, where he was like, oh, almost fell off the saddle. Like, barely got back, and I was like, okay,
that's enough.
Okay,
I
got
done.
this, but that's enough. Yep.
It sounds like no, because it says like it was really hard to just get him to fly in the first place, so he probably wasn't like
zooming.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean it wasn't scary as hell. He could have been like, oh my god, why the hell am I up here? This is crazy. So Great Council comes along, 101 comes along, and Balon dies. He's named Han and dies a few days later, and that prompts the need for the Great Council. So that everything changes. Would have been a big deal for him personally, Viserys losing his father. His mother had already died well before his mother died. When they were both, him and Daemon were both very young. So
you know what that means?
What's that?
Everything's coming up, Otto.
Everything's coming up, Otto. That's right. Just pave the way for Otto. Yeah. Speaking of Otto, it's the bit the show added, which I think makes a lot of sense. It probably was true in book canon too, where he says Otto taught him a lot about how to rule. Yeah, I mean, they were right to identify that his own father wasn't around to teach him that. So, and he was kind of young. He was only 24 when he was named king, and 26 when he became king, or named heir, and 26 when he became king. So that's still fairly young. And as we've pointed out throughout the season, no one ever taught him how to be king. He wasn't expected to be king. He was the grandson of the king. With a king with 13 children. You really just don't expect that to happen. So, and there's really not much indication they tried to catch him up on that. Like, Jaehaerys was not that old, but he was done. Like, he was traumatized, didn't want to even pick the next heir. He's like, let's just have a council. That'll probably be good, because at least people will sort of abide by their own decision.
But yeah, it seems like
while with them being bought into the process, they may be more likely to abide by it.
Yeah, it seems like Jaehaerys was kind of checked out right then.
Yeah.
in terms of him having much of a hand in guiding Viserys.
Yeah, I don't think he did. He may not have been great at it, even if he, like, maybe when he was younger, he could have been a good teacher. But, like, yeah, I don't know that he would have been capable of being such a great, like, teacher at this point. So, yeah, so he ascends age 26.
So when someone that you wouldn't normally expect to become the ruler is suddenly tapped for that position, it's a good thing they had a mentor. What a great idea. But they should just do that all the time. Who was Rhaenyra's mentor? Wait.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's kind of funny to think about. Like, don't rule like I did. That would have been Viserys' things. Like, okay, just don't do what I did. Do more, but don't be warlike, because that would be worse. But but do more than I did. Do more like your great grandfather and great grandmother did. Do more like Jaehaerys and Alysanne. So this is a big difference in the Aemma and Viserys connection. I'm sure that it was a big deal to him in book canon, but Aemma lives like 7 years longer in show canon, so they had a lot more time to be married and grow close to each other. Not that they probably weren't. They had plenty of time before that as well, but book canon, she dies in 105. Show canon, it's more like the year 112. So it's a pretty substantial difference. She dies well into his reign rather than like 2 years in. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, but it still probably doesn't make a huge difference because it's probably a really big deal to him anyway. So if we go back to that opening quote about all the different princes and princelings and people with Targaryen blood and all the spilling out of this blood into other houses and all the other dragons that were out there. So we covered who was alive when he came to the throne and who was around when he died. But check this out. There weren't very many examples of marriages outside the family. Orys Baratheon, already technically outside the family. He did have Targaryen blood, but I wanted to throw this one in there since it's somewhat relevant. Married Argella Durrandon, forcibly. And then Aenys marries Alyssa Velaryon. Aenys being the firstborn of Aegon the Conqueror. And Rhaenys, of course. And Alyssa Velaryon, of course, is grandmother to... or mother to Jaehaerys and Alysanne, so she's grandmother to Viserys and Daemon and all them. But then Maegor marries Cerys Hightower. So there we already have Velaryon, Hightower, Baratheon. All that sort of pattern of these are the biggest houses. These are the first ones to get the marriages from House Targaryen. That had already been happening. It just happens to be that Maegor had no children with Cerys Hightower or the other 5 women he tried to have kids with, including his own niece. But that went nowhere. But it could have been a big deal. And it could have been a lesson because the 2 branches of the family ended up fighting. Maegor usurped his nephew Aegon. That should have been a lesson to Viserys. Like, oh, this is when you have 2 branches, one might try to take it from the other. And he's well aware that this is a threat, especially, and his son even has the same name as the one that was usurped by Maegor. We mentioned Aemon marrying Jocelyn Baratheon, right? That's the first straight Targaryen to Baratheon marriage. Then Daella, another daughter of Jaehaerys and Alysanne, marries Roderick Arryn. They have Aemma, who comes around and marries Viserys. So they're even the ones who were born, the kids that are born from these non-Targaryen marriages, with one of them being Targaryen, come back to be the best candidates to marry the new Targaryens because they're part Targaryen. That way it's somewhat incestuous because that's what the Targaryens want. They still want to carry the bloodline with the blood of the dragon, but they have to play nice with the faith. So this is kind of their way around that by marrying a girl to one of the other big families and then bringing the fruits of that union back into the fold with the next generation. That was the pattern. Viserys was part of that pattern by marrying Aemma, and then Rhaenys marrying Corlys was part of that pattern as well, but maybe an extension or variation of that pattern by marrying their daughter again outside the house. But then the fruits of that union came around and married back in Laenor, and Laena married back in as well, and then Baela and Rhaena as well. So you see, they just had to expand it a little bit outside of just House Targaryen, and that came with all sorts of consequences, or at least new things. Things that Viserys should have dealt with. He was the first one to really face these challenges, but he didn't recognize that as his challenge. It was just something that was happening. Any takes on this, Sean? I've been kind of fire hosing history here for a couple minutes.
Yeah,
so.
What questions do you have? What takes do you have? What's your impression?
So far, I'm just trying to absorb it all. I know that this is kind of complicated, and I expect that you're somewhat of an expert on these family lines, and that you would be putting out more information than I could absorb, much less form opinions on this quick. So.
Yeah. One sense I get is that Jaehaerys kind of had an idea that it was important to keep these marriages a certain way, but maybe he didn't. It's one of the many things he didn't pass down to anyone, or maybe they just sort of looked at his example, but his example was for a different time. Like the marriages he was making were based on different political circumstances. Like he wasn't facing these same problems.
I guess here's one small take. I know just from like managing businesses, relationships in your life, roommates. I'm sure lots of you out there can relate to little social organizations that you've been part of, or maybe in charge of even, right? And there is this theoretical ideal thing that you want to happen. Some person that should be in charge of something, or some activity that should get taken care of.
Yeah.
But so-and-so doesn't like that. And so-and-so will feel slighted if someone else is put in charge. You have all these little things that will just end up being annoying or hassle. It might not create a civil war, where you might not think that it would. Or, whatever layers, level of civil war this social organization might be on. So sometimes you follow the path of least resistance. Like, this is good enough. You're not going to pick the worst person or the terrible person, but you might pick someone that's a little subpar, just to not shake the boat so much, And I can imagine maybe Jaehaerys and Viserys doing some of that, some things they kind of know this would be best, but it's so much easier to just do that instead. And they just do. And you do that enough times in a row, so it builds up. Like the frustration of people around you, the lack of appropriate assignments, you know what I mean? The little bits of inefficiencies and ineptitudes that creep along with these easy decisions start to become problems.
And that was a great segue, because the next thing I want to bring up is how a golden age, how when things are so good, it can really mask these problems, because you make a mistake, you give someone the wrong job, or they screw it up, but when the realm is doing so well, the impact is mitigated of these problems. And so maybe it reinforces the wrong lesson, that, okay, so like from a very early age, Viserys thinks that a lot of issues aren't as big a deal as they might think, because in his experience, things are great. The realm is running pretty smoothly. Like, he looks back on the early time of his grandfather's reign, the last person to be king, and there was wars, there was violence, there was uprisings, and now there isn't. So he could sit back and be like, yeah, times are good. Like, I must be doing something right. We're not having wars. We're not having a lot of infighting. He doesn't see signs of that coming. Maybe he should, but he doesn't. And that could really spoil you. I think that could really get you into a habit of thinking things are better than they are, or misframing problems is smaller because you don't see how bad they could be, because with that cushion of greatness and wealth around you, you don't necessarily see how bad those things could be if things weren't so great.
Also, sometimes you don't see the effect of behind the scenes or smaller scale decisions, especially when there's a lot of different ones.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is the best analogy, but I'm thinking about maybe like football. Some quarterback got 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, but you don't realize how good that offensive line was that was giving him
it wasn't
the
just him
to do that.
Yeah.
And so they keep signing a quarterback for millions of more dollars, and then they don't sign new offensive linemen, and suddenly the quarterback's throwing interceptions. They're like, oh, he sucks now. Like, well, maybe he's just as good now as he was before, but he doesn't have the same support.
Yes.
And you don't get stats for offensive linemen like you do for wide receivers or whatever. And I can imagine there's probably some people that were in some positions through the course of Viserys or Jaehaerys' reign that made sure that, I don't know, food was getting through the ports, that there wasn't a bottleneck at the gate, that the water was clean, that the dragons were fed enough that they didn't attack the innocent people. Things like that were kind of out of the survey of the king. And then enough time goes by and those people retire or die. And now there's less good people in those positions, but you were never really paying attention to it. And now a bunch of little problems and a bunch of little places are coming up, and you don't even know whose fault it is or how it got to be that way.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, he taught this part. This all goes back to learning the wrong lessons, not being prepared to rule, and then maybe not being very good at picking that up on his own.
And if things seem fine with him in charge, and no one mentored me, well, Rhaenyra will be fine too. Yeah. No one needs to mentor her.
You're right. He's just doing the same things that he was taught. Like, he's repeating the cycle. It's not like he's making the cycle worse. I mean, maybe it is, because as the cycle goes on, it gets worse, but he's not intentionally making it worse. He's not specifically making it worse. It just gets worse. So in reality, a golden age is the best time to make changes. It's the time you can, because the mistakes hurt less, so do the changes, so does the impact, the difficulty in changing how things work. It's best when you have cushion, you have leeway, you have extra money or whatever, extra labor, extra people around that can do the work, because there hasn't been a civil war in so long,
extra trust,
extra
credit. Yeah.
Very good point. Yeah, and trust is a good segue to the person he lost very early on. The person he trusted most of all, his wife Aemma. Whether she was a big force in giving him political advice, I don't know. But she was obviously really important in his personal life to the extent that it definitely spilled over into his political life, whether she was giving specific advice or not, because his decision-making was inexorably affected going forward by her loss and the lack of her presence being there. If she had been in his life continuously going forward, if she hadn't died, that level of comfort, being with the person he most loved in life, might have given him more strength, more ability to and he wouldn't have been traumatized as much. His brain would have been not focused on that. He would have been maybe thinking more about politics and things like that.
She might have been a better mentor to Rhaenyra.
Great point. Just her loss is, there's a lot of ways we can frame it. A lot of them are question marks, but there's a lot of different ways we can place that framing and ask that question. And he blames himself for her death because he wanted a son so badly, and pregnancy eventually killed her, which is a predictable thing in that setting. Like, you keep having babies, there's enough chance of something going wrong. They're not all going to be like Alicent, where you get through it 13 times.
Yeah, by the way, that's another thing. He might have misgauged the reality of the dangers of childbirth. Alicent had 13 babies. Aemma can too.
Yeah. On the other hand, his own mom died in childbirth, and so did Emma's own mom. So
okay, so that should have counted.
Yeah, like both of them did. Like, yikes. Yeah, that's bad. So, but here comes the prophecy, like throwing off his decision making and like why it's important to have a son and how he's so certain it was going to work out because he had a dream where it did. At least he interpreted it that way. Not to mention that if he never gets married again, there's no second family to fight over the throne. Like, that's like that also is a pretty huge factor. Regardless, though, I would rather focus on the personal impact to him. Like he in episode 3, for example, he mourns her deeply. He's crying. He's drinking the wine in front of that bonfire. It was the first example, personally, where, and for a lot of us, where we really said, wow, this guy, we saw he was a good actor. People knew that before the show, but that scene really took it up to another level for a lot of us. And then episode 8, of course, one of the main reasons we're here today having this episode, he was incredible. But there's all this, but he calls out to Aemma as he's dying, right? He says, "My love," those are his last words. And he calls Alicent Aemma by accident in the previous episode. So like, they made sure to keep that going, like to make the viewers well aware that he's still thinking about her, that she's still on his mind, that he's never forgiven himself for her death and all that. And that affects how he views Rhaenyra. Another thing he did when he was in bed there and kind of out of it, he called Rhaenyra his only daughter or his only child. Because to him, the one he had with Aemma was the one that mattered more, because that was the one that came from his true love.
I mean, I would have to say I disagree that it was because he thought Rhaenyra mattered. I think to me it was just a statement on his brain and not a statement against his children. I agree with you that he loves Aemma more and he loves Aemma and all that, but I don't think he doesn't not. I don't think he does not care about his kids with Alicent. Personally.
No, I don't say he doesn't care about them. I'm saying he doesn't care about them in that light. Like when he was dying, his focus was on the one he had with Aemma, which shows who he cared about more. I definitely agree. I wasn't trying to say he didn't care about them at all.
I don't think that. I still disagree that I don't think that's why he had that focus.
Well, I'm pretty sure he said that himself.
Well, he said that he cared about. I don't think he said that exactly. He said his focus was on Aemma. I'm
misquoting him.
Like I think his focus was on Aemma clearly, but that doesn't mean that that's why Rhaenyra was his only child or why he cared for Rhaenyra. To me, I took it as that's where his mental state was, that he was back 20 years before he'd even had those children. He didn't remember that he even had
right, but that's what I'm saying is that's why he did that. That's why his brain was 20 years ago.
He's stuck in that moment 20 years ago.
Yeah, he's stuck in that moment,
which caused him to forget his current children. It doesn't mean he doesn't care about them as much, but still, I'm just trying to suss out why he forgot about them. He's not stuck in a
moment 5 years ago or a moment 10 years ago. He's stuck in a moment 20 years
something
ago.
has to address why he wasn't thinking of his own children in that moment, right?
Yeah, and again, to me, it's that his mental capacities are greatly diminished. Is the great, I guess, to me, like, I wanted to clarify that that's the greatest reason versus, like, he's not all there, I guess.
Well, yeah, right. But I think we agree on that. Like, yeah, of course, if his faculties weren't there, he wouldn't he wouldn't be living 20 years in the past and thinking it was the present.
Yeah, I just want to cast shade on Viserys for not loving his other. I've seen a lot of memes and stuff where people are like, "Here's my giant picture of Rhaenyra," and like, "Here's the tiny 3 pics of his other kids." And I'm like, I do think he cared about them. He just wasn't as capable right then.
Well, and he wasn't. He never did get as close to them. Like his health problems were already well underway when Aegon was born, and it's just like, he was an older man. Like he was closer to Rhaenyra's age. Yeah, there's just a lot of reasons why they were closer. Yeah,
we miss a lot because of the time jumps, for better or worse. But it is possible that he feels some shame over those kids, even their behavior. But even aside from that, the moment when he realized that Alicent was foisted on him by Otto.
Mm-hmm.
From that moment on, he might have like thought twice about his attachment to those kids. I'm not sure. Maybe I shouldn't assume that, but I can imagine it.
So I wonder if he had been a bigger part of their upbringing. Here's a question for everyone: if Viserys had been a bigger part of Aegon and Aemond and maybe even Daeron, I'm not as worried about Helaena because Helena's not like mad at Viserys. She doesn't seem to be like, I want to get into this fight and take the throne. It seems like
she was happy every time she saw Viserys, even with how disturbing. You take note that like when Aegon like looked down at the table, kind of like uncomfortable with the look at his father's face, Helaena was not like that.
She was locked in.
Yeah, so I think happy her dad was around. It seemed.
I think she may have like respected and loved him more as a grandfather, like more in like a normal healthy relationship. But Aegon and Aemond, it seems like I get the sense that they didn't know him very well, and that lack of closeness may have been part of why they're willing to usurp their aunt. So. Or their half sister, rather. Even I get these things wrong.
Yeah, right.
You're right, Sean. It is complicated. Half sister. That's who it is. Aegon and Aemond are half sister to Rhaenyra. Yes, and so maybe they would respect his wishes more about being peaceful with each other if they had gotten to know him better. Like he had spent more time with them, or if they had spent more time with him. Maybe not placing blame here, just if they had spent more time together.
Yeah, and I mean. For all of that, I was trying to, I was racing to defend Viserys against you. I thought right there. Yeah. I'm also going to say I am placing blame for Viserys here. That I do think that it's upbringing that has led to his children with Alicent being the way that they are. They didn't just come out like that, and I think that he should have been more involved. But that's the problem with being terribly sick. I don't think that he's really truly at fault for being so sick that he has trouble being present in his children's lives. But I do feel like he wasn't as sick earlier on, and he also still didn't seem very present in their lives, I guess.
But they were also babies then. Like by the time Aegon was like 9, he had already lost like his half of his arm or whatever. Yeah.
And there's sort of a precedent. It seemed like he wasn't very present in Rhaenyra's life either, right? I mean, remember after Aemma had died, they had dinner, and he's like, "It's been 6 months since we talked." Like, geez,
really?
6 months since we
like, dang.
Like, how often were you talking beforehand? Is this new, or is it always like that?
And of course, that brings us to the Instagram post from Paddy that we're going to read later, which is him bringing up that he just a huge part of him just died that day that Aemma died, and all that.
Yeah.
And so he got locked up and made it harder for him to emotionally connect with all of his children, Rhaenyra included.
And Alicent. Like Alicent, part of the reason he married Alicent was because she took away some of his grief. Mm-hmm. But that's still like pining for the first wife. Like with the second wife helps take away the grief of the first wife. He's still like, there's still that element of the ghost of Aemma's still there between them. And so Alicent's never going to measure up to Aemma, and that's a crappy spot for her to be in. And for Viserys,
he never really dealt with the grief. He kind of moved on to the next thing, covered it up, or however you want to express it. But I think he never really dealt with it. And oh shoot, I was gonna say something, but I forgot it. So let's move on.
Cool. So some of these things also show up in his council. Like some of the things that worked really well for the previous king and queen did not work as well for him. And so it's like things that worked. Maybe he got the wrong impression. Jaehaerys relied on his council a lot. They were really good, Alysanne being part of that. Barth was amazing. Alysanne was amazing. And the rest of the council was pretty good too.
That's like a joke. Barth, Alysanne, and the rest.
And the rest. I don't know any of their names. Yeah. It's like even Aziz doesn't know their names. How good could they have been? Yeah. So maybe he got a little spoiled in that sense, thinking like, I put the right people in. He thinks Otto is one of those people. Now, Otto, for most of the reign, Otto probably wasn't that bad. Like, it only kind of seemed to have gotten bad when Otto tried to get involved, to foist his daughter. Before that, I don't know that Otto was such a bad dude. Like, I don't have any evidence of Otto being a bad hand. Maybe he wasn't that good either. He's no Barth. But, like, I guess he could have just been cromulent. Okay. I don't know. Fine. But certainly no big criticism. So I think maybe that was it. He got a little too easy with that. Maybe he let his other counselors choose his council. He let Alicent pick people to put on his council. I get the impression that he rejects the political side of these things too much. Like he's like, I want to have people I can trust. I don't want this to be all about politics. I want to have a good council that I can trust. It needs to be about politics a little bit because it is about politics. Like, there are people on the council who are going to make moves and decisions based on what helps them and their families. And he can't just like shun all of that, just like rise above that. No, he has to be aware of that. He feels like he was just trying to like throw all that into a corner, the good and the bad, or the stuff that needed attention and the stuff that he could rightfully try to downplay. I feel like that was a way to kind of frame his counselor choices. A lot of just ambivalence. And like a lot of other things, he just didn't take enough care with it. Kind of thought it would work because it had worked before. Okay, let's take a little break here.
Real quick, I do want to point out, it mostly worked. They went 20 years with no war. I mean, it's a lot of like non-war. It didn't work. It wasn't a complete failure. Yeah. Maybe it could have been better. Maybe you could have got 30 years of no war or whatever.
I think it's worth saying that no war and no famine as well. Like, it's beyond like people. The realm seemed relatively taken care of as far as we know.
Maybe Otto and some of these guys do deserve a little bit more credit. Like someone like Tywin. We think Tywin was terrible. But he was fairly competent in his hands. Some of the decisions he made, like legal changes, were bad. Like, definitely reversed positive changes. But like, no one starved under him either. Like, that's fair's fair. Like, he did that part well, I guess. I don't know for sure, but seems like he did.
A few people drowned.
A few people drowned. A few. Well, that was before he was hand, but yeah. We're really trying to separate these things into individual cases here. Yeah, I also wonder, like, in the books, it's implied he had more offers for a second wife than just Alicent, and also she was older, so it wasn't as, like, the foisting angle wasn't as severe here. But still, it seems like he didn't choose based on politics at all. Like, he was like, Elena, that whole thing with Lena, like, the best political choice is Lena. The best political choice is Lena. It's like, but I don't want to, He said the thing about her being too young, which we're like, yeah, she is, but so is Alicent. That wasn't the most convincing argument, given the other option was only a little bit older. But anyway.
I mean, there's this assumption he has to remarry at all, like,
right? He doesn't,
which maybe they're assuming because they want to have a man rule. But if you get over that, which they got, or he got over at least anyway, it doesn't matter as much. There were other options, especially when it comes to like marrying kids to each other. So, I think it would have been. I don't want to dismiss your point too much, but I think that was a political decision to marry or not marry her, like. The realm is watching. Someone, I think Corliss even made that point. Like, the realm is watching me marry a little girl. I'm not doing that. You know what I mean? I think that's a political move. I think that's a statement.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right about that. Yeah, and I think that he wasn't willing to. It would have been fine. That kind of political move makes him uncomfortable, but it actually would have been fine for the realm. The realm wouldn't have been like, "Ooh, you married a young girl." Like, sadly, Westeros would not object to that. Most of Westeros would not.
Well, they might not object, but they might think it's more okay. Maybe he doesn't think it's okay, and he doesn't want anyone else to think it's okay either. Yeah, he's trying to not endorse other people doing this.
I see. Which he doesn't exactly cover by marrying someone only slightly older.
Yeah, like, it's okay if they're 15, but it's 12.
In book canon, she was a lot older. So he didn't actually do this in book canon. In book canon, he married, she was a lot younger, but not like, she wasn't a teenager. She was like 26 or something.
And Lena wasn't Lena was about 12 still, I guess. She was still pretty young comparatively, but
no, because the book really jumps that apart too. Because remember, Aemma dies in. Oh no, you're right. Because book Aemma dies in 105 when Lena is about 12 or 13. Yeah, book they had to. That's what part way had to change Lena's age because she would have been much older by the time that came around. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Let's do a little shout outs here. A few patrons. And then we're going to talk about Paddy Considine, a little actual Paddy Considine stuff. And while I'm reading some shout-outs, Ashea is going to put up a selection of some excellent Paddy Considine-related and Viserys memes for your viewing pleasure. So if you aren't able to watch, if you're not watching on Spotify or YouTube, well, this is just incentive for you to maybe watch next time. But you'll still have something to listen to as I shout out these awesome patrons of ours. Let me start with our Blood Riders. Koakoi, called Sunpiercer, wielder of a Dragonbone bow. Kokavo the Tamer, wielder of a Wildfire Whip. Gehenna. Screenwriter Catherine Van Pelt, wielder of the Valyrian Steel Quill, slayer of unoriginal screenplays. And let's see here. We've got our Queens of Love and Beauty. From the depths of Fleet. Look, Viserys himself is a queen of love and beauty. Look at that. He serves Targaryen realness.
He does.
From the depths of Flea Bottom, Lord Ken of House Hammer has declared for Queen Kari, Fire of the North, who recovered Dark Sister from beyond the wall. Is that meme comparing Viserys to the Crypt Keeper of
Tales from the Crypt? Yes.
Tales from the Crypt. That's both mean and funny. A Laurel of Glory in the name of love to Bud of House Beresford, a Knight of Tolkien, and Arbiter of Scotch from Sandy the Dragon, blood of Queen Daenerys and Lady of Jameson. Also, let's send a shout out to one of our other batches of patrons. Let's go with our Northern champions this time. Let's shout out Jay Wilson, Winter's King, Lord of the First Men, Lady Ardros, Mother of Wolves, wielder of the Valyrian Steel Claymore Manticore, Jake Snow, a.k.a. Jacob Ice Eyes, the Bastard of the Last River, Lord Darren of House Rambler, the Last Hunt is Ceaseless, Lady Bobby of House Mitchell, Gandalf the White, that's W-I-G-H-T, Lord of House Seamorn, Shari of Skane, last of the Long Night archaeologists and wielder of the untested hypothesis, a Valyrian steel trowel with a dragon bone handle. Lady Nicole of House Anime, motto, the small can be powerful, captain of Sweet Camellia. Adelard the Wanderer is wielder of the Valyrian steel axe Frostfall. The Bitter Steel is next up. Last but not least is Aaron Snow, the Evergreen Bastard, who made a vow to defend the North with his werewood-handled axe Timberfell. Yes, that's right. I hope you were enjoying both the awesome names of our supporters and the great memes Ashea has been showing. Let's get back to it. Trey Mackey says another mistake that Viserys made was not giving up the throne. He could have abdicated before he died. And I think, Sean, you made a suggestion like this, I think last episode or maybe recently. And as soon as he was incapable of ruling, rather than giving the job to people who aren't the king, his queen and his council, maybe just move on to the next person who's actually going to be the ruler. I actually had that in my notes as a suggestion. We'll talk about it now. I do think it's a fine suggestion. I wonder if it never crossed his mind. We don't have a lot of examples of abdication. There's 0 examples of abdication on the Iron Throne. Certainly not to this point. And there may be some, like, maybe there's a king of winter that abdicated or a king of the reach. That there's probably 1 or 2, historically speaking. If we look, we could probably find one. I can't think of one off the top of my head. There's definitely some real world ones. But
wasn't there a Targaryen that married for love? I want to say it was like
he didn't abdicate. He gave up his place in the line of succession, which he would have been king. He was next. Okay. So that's a good example because that's the closest. But he didn't give it up for being incapable. He was still a young man. But yeah, that was Egg's first son, Duncan the Small, who married Jenny of Oldstones and was told, well, then you can't be king. He's like, well, then, okay, fine, I'll go with love. And kind of figured, I don't think he might have made the right choice there. Like, given all these other things, like, yeah, that dude probably made the right call. We don't know what happened to him. He may have just died at Summerhall with his love and everybody else, but before he would have been king anyway. But I don't know. We don't know exactly what happened to that guy. All right, let's talk about Paddy Considine. Paddy's 49 years old. So, like most of the show, they were making him look younger. That's why we were pointing out he didn't really look 26 at the Great Council, or 24. Yeah, it's hard to make him look that much younger. He's won a lot of awards in his career already for his acting. I think there's a good chance some more are coming. Maybe, especially for this one.
Not just acting, by the way. He's done writing and producing and directing. Yeah. He's made some short films and feature-length movies that have gotten a lot of acclaim. He's worked with Olivia Colman, who I think has been nominated for Best Actress several times, if not won a couple times. So he's been around a lot of talent and the industry in general. He's got a lot of experience.
He's kind of an all movie guy. Like, he's part of writing, he's part of acting, especially the acting part. But yeah, writing, acting, also some music and
entertainer guy. Yeah, he's been in a couple bands.
Yeah, he's been in a couple bands.
Drummer.
Yeah, he was in a band called She Talks to Angels, which was named for the song of Black Crowes fame. And he's
in another band called Riding the Low. I think he left that band early, but made his own new band called Riding the Low.
Yeah, he left She Talks to Angels. Yeah. But yeah, he was drummer.
He's been in some music videos. He's been in like Coldplay and Arctic Monkey music videos.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
All over the place.
Yeah, he's known pretty well. So yeah, early in his career, what's interesting is in his career early on, he was known for playing like anti-heroes, villains, and darker characters. So he clearly broke out of that at one point. Hot Fuzz was a big part of breaking out of that, becoming something more comedic, and that went really well. He got memed. Speaking of memes, he was in a famous one that's repeated. Not a meme, that's more of
a reaction gif.
A reaction gif, yeah. But similar social media post thing. They're in the similar category. Yeah, he was in The Death of Stalin, which was hilarious. It doesn't sound like a movie that's supposed to be funny.
Yeah, but it's very, very funny. I highly recommend The Death of Stalin to anyone who wants to see more of Paddy. And you'll recognize a bunch of other actors in it, too. It was very good. And then he was also in The World's End, which is another Cornetto trilogy, Nick Frost.
Edgar Wright. Simon Pegg.
Yeah, one of those. Exactly.
Which is
he was also in a couple that they weren't comedies, but he was in a couple of the Bourne movies too.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, he was. Yeah, so he's done a lot of stuff. Married with 3 kids. He lives where he's from, which was something on Trent. He's from somewhere. I've spaced out. I was like, I don't need to write that down. I'll remember, and then I forgot. So he has Asperger's syndrome too. So that's interesting that he's a good example of someone that lives a normal life, functions quite well, despite that. Paddy's mother had diabetes and lost her legs and sight, so he may have some particular insight into playing someone who was declining rapidly due to health reasons. And
he's spoken about that was his inspiration that he drew from when performing.
There's pretty much no way that wasn't a big deal in his life. Yeah, how could it not be? So here is something he tweeted, or rather it was on his Instagram, that hit pretty much every other platform. Would anyone care to read this?
Sure, I'll read this. Okay. I've got it here.
I wasn't sure you wanted to. I thought it might be a little too
sad. I know.
Sad.
By the way, y'all, I was very glad that Sean was on today's episode. Not just because I don't like Sean, because that's great too, but because I really didn't want to be on camera because I knew I was going to cry. But
that's why I wasn't assuming you'd want to read this. For anyone out there, I was like, do you want to read this? Yeah.
From Paddy on Instagram, he said, "Thank you for the kind words. I cannot reply to every comment, but I'd like to acknowledge that they haven't been lost upon me. It was an incredible adventure where I made lots of new friends that will be with me for the rest of my life. I'd like to thank the creators for allowing me the freedom to make Viserys my own. I have never loved a character so much. I want to give massive love and respect to Brookshian, who came in for only a few days, but changed the course of my character with her brilliant performance and commitment to the work. The impact stayed with me until my final improvised words. She unlocked the missing piece of the puzzle for me and allowed my story to come full circle. From the moment she dies, so does Viserys. It was a love story. That's the secret I carried with me. As sick as he gets, he never, himself, demands any cure. He quietly accepts his suffering, never forgiving himself for putting his beloved wife through such torture in her final moments. Viserys was a gift. I am so honored he found me. Now, no more."
Man, that hits hard. It's like I'm not an actor. I don't know nothing about acting, but I get it that when you're playing someone else, you use certain things to remind yourself to kind of really anchor yourself to that character. To these are the pillars of what I'm doing with this character. And it sounds like Aemma was the pillar, the number one pillar, his relationship to his wife, and in real life to the actress. It seems like that made a big difference.
And it rang true with them showing him frequently looking at the ring, wearing the ring, and all that. That emblem, that reminder of Aemma that he had.
And it's great because, like I said at the beginning of this episode, politically, yeah, it's easy to forget about him in the history books. And Fire and Blood would not record things like this. In most historical texts, would not contain information like the things we're discussing right now, things that meant a lot to these individuals, things that drove them, things that motivated them, things that they carried with them the whole time. That doesn't make history books, right? It wouldn't be in Fire and Blood. So like when we've read about this character in the first place, we could imagine there's more, but we couldn't have imagined this specifically. And wow, seeing this, like, it's hard to imagine someone doing better with a role. And most roles don't have this much room to work with too. Like too much of it's outlined for them ahead of time. So it's a concordance of a great source material that allows someone to work with it, and then someone that worked with it as exceptionally well.
So we were talking about this before, saddest scenes in all of the series, right? For me personally, in all of Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire, the saddest scene has always been Maester Aemon saying, "Egg, I dreamed I was old," which there's something relatable about a character aging, and we've all dealt with someone else in our life aging or our own fear. Like there's a lot of levels to that I get me more than something like The Red Wedding, where I can't relate to everyone being murdered at a wedding. Like I can't. So it's just never going to hit me quite as hard. And with Viserys, House of the Dragon has made a scene that to me is on par as sad as George R. R. Martin's saddest scene in all of Song of Ice and Fire. Like nothing in Game of Thrones ever made me quite as heartbroken as this. And I think, again, it is just... I think relatability is a great part of that. And in terms of like Viserys' body failing him and just the tragedy of that, I think is something that hits a lot of us very closely.
With that memory stuff too, like the way his memory wasn't quite out, with a little remembering times before. That's a very similar, like remembering Aemma, remembering his one child versus thinking of Egg, who had died 50 years before that moment with Aemon. Yeah. Well said. Yeah, I tweeted about this and saying like, what were other people's top performances? Because it's like, yeah, in the original Game of Thrones show, there were a lot of amazing performances. Almost every episode had amazing performances. Even some of the episodes we really thought weren't that good, or even thought were kind of bad, even some of those had great performances in them. Like those were sometimes that helped make it like okay. That was the saving grace in some cases. But even in those, like, you rarely had a character that got that much focus in one episode. Like Viserys in episode 8 of House of the Dragon season 1 is, you get more, like the amount of screen time and focus he got is unusual for a Game of Thrones episode. Like Tyrion at his trial was one people named a lot. That's a good one. Cersei at the end of season 6, that was one people cited. Jaime and Brienne in the hot tub. As far as other House of the Dragon moments, people cited Matt Smith in Ep 3, but really I don't think that one comes even close, even though it was great. Totally great. I don't think it stacks up to this, but it was great.
So, it's funny you talk about how like the amount of time that we stayed with Viserys or something like that. It makes me think of I was rewatching some of the behind the scenes, the House the Dragons built, and they talked about how they really felt like the first half of the season was them doing closer to original Game of Thrones style, and that they, with their second pilot, when they do the time skip and everyone's aged up, they really felt like they were resetting into what is House of the Dragon style, which what they implied is part of that is spending a little more time with a character, and like that's what they did with when they set us up with Rhaenyra first meeting like Aemma as Rhaenyra, and each of these places that was a little bit more
one-on-one interactions with different characters.
With different characters I think some of their mandate, some of what their goal was. Whereas the first half they were doing it more of a traditional Game of Thrones style, they said, which I did feel that difference in tone. I think in the last couple of episodes.
And I guess we'll see that going forward, maybe.
Another factor is Game of Thrones, pretty much throughout, and more so in the first half of this series, has had more locations. They've jumped around. People kind of scattered around, which keeps certain interactions from happening, keeps you from focusing too much, quote unquote, too much on one character. Where when you get everyone together at King's Landing, then you get to have more of the interaction. You can have one person interacting with all the different people and center around that one person without abandoning another storyline. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Did we want to do the Paddy compilation video?
Yeah, play
now?
the video. Here's a video Shay put together of some behind the scenes stuff with Paddy, some social media stuff. It just shows what a great guy he is.
Yeah, and I'll be we'll tweet this a little bit later and share it on TikTok as well. Now that I've put it together, but this is first being shared here. Different things. So let me play it.
When people ask me about the show and they just assume I'm going to be riding a dragon, and then they say, "Oh, did you get to ride a dragon?" And I go, "No." "Oh, did you fight in it though?" "No." And then they say, "What do you do?" And I go, "I don't know, sit around a council table all day."
Protector of the realm. Do hereby. I'm so sorry.
Go Vissy, man, yeah!
Go Vissy, they're saying.
Kill that
Vissy.
Smurf. Yeah!
I like that it's Lionel Strong that says, "Kill that Smurf."
Yeah, kill that Smurf.
He's fabulous. He's serving Targaryen realness. Close your eyes. Give me your hand.
He's singing the Bangles in bed.
Eternal Flame.
Eternal Flame. That's an appropriate Targaryen song.
Yep.
Eternal Flame.
And so there's just a little snippet from those are all from the house that dragons built, behind the scenes featurettes right there. Yeah, definitely he will be sorely missed on that set. You can just tell he was so funny on all these clips. Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
I think so. Yes.
No, I'm guessing that is what was maybe on his mind a little bit.
So one thing that we criticized Viserys for was maybe not pushing back against Alicent when she stopped him from doing decisions that we thought would have been good, like forcing the issue with Helena and Jace, for example. We were like, "Oh, I wish that marriage had happened. That may have really prevented a lot of problems." And we were like, "Why doesn't he push harder? Maybe he just like he's the king. He can say this is happening and she can't stop it, at least not legally." But this comes back to the great quarrels. I think about how big a deal those were, how the king and queen were divided, the last pairing were divided very publicly and dramatically twice during their reign, and how that caused a lot of issues. And maybe Viserys just didn't want to go that way. He didn't want to have that same level of division, so he let her have her way on some things that maybe he shouldn't have. Of course, other things she had her way on that were a good thing. But this
maybe he just respects the wishes of a woman. Maybe he doesn't think he has the authority to tell other people what to do with their lives and their children. I mean, even if he theoretically does as a king, I don't know. I respect some of the things that he
power that he declined to use that most kings would have used. Yeah, I can kind of respect that too. I do wish he would have more like made a deal of how kings shouldn't do these things rather than just not doing them, because then that sets an example rather than just looking like he's just apathetic. Because it doesn't look like he's necessarily look like he's setting a good example. It maybe just look like he doesn't care. I'm not sure. Like in world, maybe it comes off differently, but it does look like he doesn't care in other examples. Like with Daemon, it just looks like he's lenient, like he just lets him get away with stuff, and maybe that sends a message that that's how he is about a lot of things. That he just like, I'm a pushover, I'm lenient. That's maybe what gets projected. Maybe it's more nuanced than that, though. We have seen him like show a lot of spine. Like when he gets mad, he really gets. Yeah, you don't want to get in his face when he's doing that. Yeah.
He draws the line pretty far away in the sand.
Yeah.
But man, if you go all the way over there and cross that line, I'm gonna pull my sword out and make a big deal about it. But
yeah, he would have. I mean, he would have taken Vaemon's tongue, or probably ordered someone else to do it eventually. When he realized that how hard that would have been for hit to do. But like he pulls his dagger, like one-armed frail king is like, you pissed me off. Like someone hold him down. Might take me an hour to saw that tongue out of your mouth, but it's just gonna happen. So and another thing is nice about him, like unlike a lot of other kings, no evidence he fathered any bastards, which he fathered a whole second family, which causes a problem, but no bastard children is a good thing, which is an example of how
they accuse him of that in Fire and Blood, right?
I believe there was maybe one
claimant.
child that they said could have been, but it was it was disproven.
But, just worth throwing out there that there is a version of the story where maybe he did.
Yeah, so it is possible he had them. It's just not the Fire and Blood declined to show that.
He certainly,
the show declined to show that, and Fire and Blood only vaguely hinted at the possibility.
Yeah, and the show referred to how Viserys and his brother Daemon they used to go to the brothels, to the pleasure houses together, to the Street of Silk or whatever. So he slept around. And they would have been married to Aemma then.
Yeah, it's not like he avoided the problem; it just didn't happen.
Yeah. It's not like he wasn't necessarily sleeping with.
But even after King, he apparently he wasn't that type to go sleep around or whatever. Which, when you're a king, I guess that is actually to their credit. When you have that kind of power and you can like have anyone you want, like that's a good example of not using a power you have. That's a good thing, right? We wonder if he has more in common with Daron. He never got to know Daron, the one who's off in Hightower Land. It sounds like he might be more in common with him. He doesn't seem to have that much in common with Aegon or Aemon. Maybe.
Although I remember, I think Emwelia, the artist, had that great list of parallels between Viserys and all of his kids. Do you remember? Yeah, like, one was that Viserys in book canon more so, but we see it in the show as well, is fun-loving, a party lover. Like people like to call him Party Dad Viserys.
Yeah.
And that's Aegon right there to a T.
That's true.
And with Helena, they both have their hobby of bugs or models, and they both have their dragon dreams.
Okay.
Yeah, anyway, I'm like, what was the other one?
Helena I could see a bit. Aegon, I missed.
And Aemon both lost an eye.
That's what they have in common.
Yeah, they do have that in common. That is true, but yeah.
They both claimed great big old dragons.
Yeah, that was the one that I was thinking of for Aemon. Was they both claimed
dragons,
a conqueror's dragon because they claimed Visenya and Aegon's dragons respectively.
Hey son, yeah, Dad, I like big dragons. Yeah, me too, son. So Miguel Sapochnik said that anyone who cuts themselves on the Iron Throne has a chance to contract this special sort of Westerosi leprosy. Not that they definitely get it, but that they can. And Viserys definitely did. It was an interesting choice. I didn't think it was necessary because it's just like he's just got some disease. It didn't have to come from the Iron Throne. Whatever. To me and to him, from Paddy Considine's point of view, it was more about losing Aemma. Either way, the man's life declined. He had health and unresolved trauma, both of which will impact your health. So it really works all together as just he's got a lot of things messing his health up. A real quick timeline on how it declined so quickly. Episode 1, wound on his back, which was already there prior to the episode, was getting cauterized, already weeping, basically. And he cuts his finger while telling Daemon he's no longer heir. Episode 2, the finger is worse. He gets maggot treatment. It's already turned black. Episode 3, 3 years have passed. 2 fingers are gone. Episode 4, his arm is worse. Lots of sores on his back. That's where we get the very unpleasant scene of him sleeping with Alicent, where his back is all messed up. And it's like, whoa, this is worse. Episode 5, he faints twice. His nose bleeds. He has lots of fatigue and vomiting. Episode 6, 10 years have passed. He looks visibly haggard. A lot of his hair is gone. Half of his arm is gone. Episode 7 is only like a little bit after that, so it's basically the same. Episode 8, 6 more years passed. His decline is extremely advanced. He's lost an eye. He's in massive pain, constantly doped up, and then, of course, dies at the end. I wonder if he was also remembering how things had ended for Jaehaerys, the previous king, also missing his wife in a lot of more emotional than physical pain, probably a good bit of physical pain too, but more emotional, had lost so many children and grandchildren and his wife, and was probably feeling like, well, the good thing about dying is I can be reunited with them again. And that seems to be where Viserys was as well.
What do you... I have to say, I mean, I've seen people in the chat about it. I'm pretty against this leprosy on the Iron Throne concept. I'm like,
yeah,
I just like, I'm not super on board with it. I feel like there's a lot of other directions they could have gone with diseases or illnesses that, like, I'm super on board with them doing the illness. And in the books, Viserys deals with diabetes and weight issues that lead to terrible health issues as well. So like, it is in the book, but the idea of someone getting cut on the Iron Throne and maybe getting leprosy is like a very weird decision to me, I have to say.
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder if now that Miguel Sapochnik has left the show, I wonder if they're even going to just...
Yeah, like, okay, Miguel, we did your thing.
Never mind.
Because like, what?
Yeah, I wonder a couple things. One, I wonder if it was just, a thought he had, an offhand comment that he made that people kind of latched onto. He didn't necessarily mean. Show canon is he had definite leprosy.
Yeah.
And
he said a form of leprosy from the Iron Throne, technically, is what he said.
All those dirty swords,
kind of
man.
leprosy, like almost as if Miguel was more so just like leprosy is synonymous with an illness from the throne.
Maybe an unnamed planetos disease that
Thronitis
is similar to leprosy, but he didn't want to get caught up in the details of how leprosy works. Does it spread? How come no one else is getting it? Maybe he wanted to have some semblance of a scientific explanation of what this could be, but if we got into details of it, it would fall apart.
Well, it could be a magical. This is a world with magical diseases, so it wouldn't be that hard to explain.
I will say, without getting into it, there are characters yet to come, and characters in the past who've cut themselves on the Iron Throne, and if they for the most part, we don't see enough of the rest of their reign.
Don't live very long,
for us to see that this disease develop. But my one thought is Aerys cutting himself, and honestly, in Game of Thrones, he looks pretty rough for his age. Like, he looks very haggard.
Part of why this works, as they can insert it and not cause problems. But even if we don't like it, we can. It's
not a plot hole, really. As far as I can tell, I don't think there's something where you're like, oh, this doesn't work because of this. It does work, I guess.
Yeah.
I like it more being, symbolic
of
festering problems or whatever, a manifestation of unresolved issues or, a million ways you could say it.
It can still be those things also, but I'm with you. I like it I like it being more that being the emphasis. Yeah.
I see Terra Incognito pointing out, normal leprosy would be contagious, and this isn't. So right there,
that's why they have to call
clearly,
it a version of.
A version type. Yeah. It is clearly not contagious based on him kissing babies and other. Anyways. Yeah.
Steve Van Preen sends a comment from Patreon. This is a good question here. Do you believe that King gave everything he had not only to be with his family but to stand up for his daughter, and that expedited his death? Basically, that he maybe would have lived a little longer if he hadn't exerted himself so much for that last moment. I definitely think so. I think if your health is that weak, you're just kind of on an hourglass, and anything that shakes the hourglass causes those sands to drop a little faster.
Yeah, I'd say Paddy said that Viserys knew that this was his last day, but I think he knew that because he was making it his last day. In other words,
exerted his last bit of strength.
Yeah, if he had just not done anything that day, I don't think he would have died that night. But he probably maybe only had 2 weeks or a month. It had to be pretty finite at that point. But
it was close either way. You're right. Yeah. And he knew it. He wasn't under any illusions. Despite his mental state not being all the way there, he still knew that much. He knew he was. He said that he's I won't be among you much longer. At the dinner.
I wonder if along those lines, maybe he was pushing himself to stay alive for this moment. I can't die yet. My family hasn't come to me. You know what I mean? Maybe he was, that was what was keeping him going as long as he went, was this hope to have one last moment with his family members.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And then it came, and then he was done.
So we went over a lot of this about the first queen, having the first queen. This could have been Viserys' legacy if he had handled it better, and maybe it wouldn't have worked anyway. But if he had handled it, we don't know. But if he certainly didn't give his all. Had he handled it better, had he helped pave the road for Rhaenyra's succession, had he done things a little differently, maybe we could have had a smooth first queen, and that could have been the pattern from then on. He could have changed the laws of succession, and that would have been a major thing to have as your legacy, because. Having looked at the Dance of the Dragons, Radio Westeros and us did our combination, our co-op of 4 episodes are out so far. We got a 5th one on the way this month. We started off by examining the causes for the dance, and I'm adamant that had they just kept it simple, oldest heir, doesn't matter gender, that person's next. So many problems are avoided, because what happens is you skip someone, and that's where the civil wars come. You skip one person and you're like, well, what about their kids? Well, what about the people after them? Once you skip someone, their children are left out, and then they feel skipped. It's just all the civil wars come from the complications. So you got to keep it simple, and skipping people is not simple. When you're skipping an entire branch, because it's usually not just one person. You're skipping a branch, or something that can become a branch later. Maybe it's only a single person now. It becomes a branch later. So Yeah, so that was the problem. Like, yes, he's following on the pattern of, yes, the Great Council can't prove that you can decide, but you still have to do more than that. Swearing isn't enough, especially when they all swore 28 years ago. And a lot of them have died.
I want to point out that he should have done more. There's a bunch of other people that should have done more also.
Yeah,
Rhaenyra included.
Yes, you're right. Like, and that
if he had done everything perfectly, things might have worked out fine, but maybe not, because other people might have still screwed other things up. And if he screws up what he screws up, but everyone else does things perfectly, well, then things also still work out. As typical, it's hard to attribute all the blame or responsibility to just one person.
Yeah,
but it's fair to give the king more than any one other single one person.
Like, here's two examples I want to say. You're totally right. But let me add some even more context. Jaehaerys could have just said, never mind. If the Great Council had picked someone, he could have just been like, you know what? Actually, no. He wasn't bound by it. He's still the king. He can be like, never mind. I mean, that would not have gone well. But he could have done that. And just, we'll see what happens. Like, let's use Daeron the Good as an example. Daeron the Good, son of Aegon the Unworthy. Daeron the Good's the one who presided over the Blackfire rebellions. Unlike Viserys, he didn't cause them. His father did. Aegon the Unworthy caused the Blackfire rebellions indirectly by the way he had kids and legitimized them and all that. Daeron the Good tried very hard to prevent civil war from happening during his life. The Blackfire rebellion didn't break out till like 14 years after he was named, or no, like 10 or 11 years after he was named king, something like that, more than a decade. He tried to keep them close. He was like, he gave Daemon Blackfire stuff. He gave Bittersteel some stuff. He gave Bloodraven a seat on the council. He kept them like involved and tried to smooth and then Blackfire Rebellion still happened. So that's something we got to keep in mind when you blame Viserys. It's like, well, this guy tried to stop it and it still happened. So maybe it still would have happened.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the consequences are larger. The Blackfire Rebellions, there were no dragons, but still, it's still, yeah.
Just because it might have still happened doesn't mean, oh, well, I shouldn't try.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you should still make the best effort, even if it may end up not working out. So.
Yeah. Because like I said, the lesson was there. Maegor usurped nephew Aegon the Uncrowned, which was his great uncle. that was Viserys' great uncle. That wasn't that long ago. So they know what happens when there's two branches in one and they don't agree on who should be in charge. So, yeah. So he had examples of that.
By the way they do all these intermarriages and such, your great uncle could be 200 years ago or younger than you.
Yeah. That's true. All right, let's have a quick section on like his legacy. We talk about what it could have been had he changed the succession laws. That would have been a excellent fit for the history book. That's the kind of thing that you definitely get put in the history book for doing that, for saying, yeah, you changed how the succession laws work. That's a pretty big change to how that's huge.
I'll say right off the bat, that's one that might have just not worked. Like, that's one thing maybe he should have done, but that's kind of Otto's point. He's like, look, you can name her, but the lords of the realm aren't going to accept
the patriarchy
it.
might
change
just
this law, but people aren't going to go along.
It would have been a big change,
but I'm not going to listen to you.
Right, which is part of why I think it would have been a big deal. Like, if he could have successfully changed it, that would have been like, wow, you managed to get all these men to like allow this, even though they hate it.
That would have been step one, to change the law. Now he's got to find a way to get everyone on board with this change in the law. You can't just say this and then sit back in your ivory castle and hope it works.
Yeah, like going back to your ivory castle. Hey, they got some ivory in there probably. Yeah, like with Aegon V, like what we said, he changed a lot of laws to make them more pro-commoner laws, and then Tywin just undid them. So, like, yeah, there's laws, but like, well, people can undo laws or just not obey them or cancel them when you're dead. Yeah, so. And this also, so when Viserys lamented to Lionel Strong that his reign lacked challenges, I think in this episode we identified a lot of challenges. He just didn't recognize them as challenges. He didn't have the traditional enemy invading challenge, like wars, that he didn't have that traditional challenge. He didn't have, maybe he was thinking of the Song of Ice and Fire. Maybe I would have been the one. Maybe it could have been me that faced the cold and darkness, but it wasn't any of those things. But like you said at the beginning, Sean, it's definitely a plus to him that he never had to call the banners in like 30 years or 20 some years of ruling. He never called the banners. Like, he gets partial credit. Like, that's the realm built before him. That's the groundwork by Jaehaerys and Alysanne and people even before that, and counselors and people at every level. But he definitely gets credit for keeping it that way, for holding it that way, even though it looks like it's about to go pretty quickly after his death, but we'll see about that.
I did want to say earlier when you were talking about the idea of, some of these issues he could have, should have addressed. I was thinking about that when he was, was it with Lord Strong, with Lionel Strong, when he was like, I was never really tested, and Lionel Strong's like, count yourself lucky, you don't realize what you're wishing for to get tested.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I think that he probably had been tested in ways he hadn't recognized, kind of like you were saying, like he wanted to be tested like in his ability to charge into battle or something like that. But I think he was failing a bunch of small tests, and who he assigned to his council, and what laws he passed, and his diplomacy with the Lord in the North, and the Bravos and the Stepstones. Like the fact that someone's going to marry someone and Bravos is suddenly a threat to the realm. Like, you should have a better relationship with that entity if that suddenly could be such an issue, right?
Yeah, or you should have the wherewithal to be like, are you sure it's? Are you exaggerating this threat? Like like that kind of thing.
Yeah, but sometimes those things may be hard to see as tests when they seem like small, simple decisions. And he did tend, it seems, to just take the path of least resistance, which on one hand doesn't lead to war, but on the other hand doesn't test. Like he doesn't get to these moments where he has to make a tough decision, which might ostracize someone or start a war or cause personal stress or whatever it is. Now it's not like he never did these, because he did name Rhaenyra queen, which is not the path, which is a path of resistance, if you will. And stuck to it. Like when it was challenged, he is stuck to it. So I would say that I don't know if he's exactly passing that test, but he's being tested. And I think that he finally passes with a D when he makes that walk up the throne room. That was the time when he really evoked his strength and his resolve and made a stand. Faced his opponents.
Showed he was willing to kill for
it.
He was like,
pulled out a knife, backed it up.
Is that a D for dead, Sean?
A D for dagger? Or a
D for dagger, yeah. Disease.
He went from Viserys to Viserys.
Yeah. He was also kind of tested. It didn't come to fruition, but when he was sent, he did decide to send men to the Stepstones. Like he did get involved in a war, and then Daemon just ended it.
They never actually fought,
so it didn't happen. But that was Viserys making that decision at that point to get involved.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And it's something that we didn't see a lot of. I wish we saw it more. I want to believe this type of thing happened a lot, but remember that I think. I don't quite remember the flow of the conversation, but it was in the midst of this discussion about the Stepstones, and Rhaenyra even tried to speak up and say, hey, why don't we just fly a dragon down there? And he kind of shut her down. But it came out in the wake of this that he had sent diplomats. He was making an effort. He did have a plan. He wasn't just ignoring it. He might not have been doing the perfect thing, but I appreciate that in that moment, he wasn't completely ignoring it. And I got to imagine in a bunch of other scenarios where someone might have called the banners or chopped someone's head off, or
he would have done something similar.
Shoot someone out and embarrass them. He did some behind the scenes maneuvering. He was taking some actions.
Yeah, maybe he gets more credit than we think, for stopping violence from breaking out. If he didn't stop certain other things, other ways violence could break out, but maybe he stopped more traditional conflicts from happening with diplomacy ahead of time. Maybe he was good at that. Yeah, maybe. I mean, the end result implies that,
Yeah. It's kind of like the offensive line I was talking about. Like the history books aren't writing about the left guard. They're writing about how many touchdowns a quarterback threw. And so it's hard to see or know, both for the historians or even say it was known. Say they talked a lot in Fire and Blood about the minutiae of his behind the scenes diplomacy. It's not the most exciting for a TV show, right? We want to see these dragons and these sword fights, and it would not have been as interesting to give us, episode after episode of behind the scenes negotiating that stops wars, right? That's not as exciting or fun, for better or worse.
And they do give us a lot of that.
It doesn't mean Viserys wasn't doing it.
And they give us I think Grant Condal said they had something like 70 or 80 or something, a massive number of pages just in the small council room, just talking, because he talked about how much he loved those small council scenes in the original Game of Thrones, and obviously a lot of people are like, "Oh, we're back to another." I think Ben Schwartz was doing his Game of Thrones watch for the first time. You know, Jean Ralphio from Parks and Recreation. He's been watching Game of Thrones, and his tweets have been really funny. But he had a good tweet where he like watches like some big battle episode. He's like, as is custom, after a big battle episode, we're back to people in dark rooms talking around a table. You know, I was like, yeah, that is right, and I love it. I love those more than the big battle episodes. I appreciated like the clip that I shared of Paddy talking about Viserys. He said, you know, well, what do? Do you ride dragons? Do you fight?
You fight anybody?
He's like, no, I just sit around a small council table. I'm like, and it's riveting. It's great. I love it.
Yeah.
In fact, it's funny that he dies before the episode called The Green Council. But hey, so there's definitely some spoilers. There's definitely some counseling in the next episode. Oh gosh, I said this episode was spoiler free, and then I went and ruined it. Okay, so wrapping things up, just a couple last points here. So I'd say Viserys, there's only 5 kings at the time when he died. He'd been the 5th king on the Iron Throne. I'd put him right in the middle. He wasn't as good as Aegon or Jaehaerys. Better than Aenys or definitely better than Maegor. That's easy. But I think Aenys was maybe the closest to him. The one who was a little weak, a little too lenient, wanted to be liked. But Aenys was even weaker. Aenys was like, when there were rebellions, he'd be like, why is this happening? I don't get it. And he would be very indecisive about how to respond to it, which I don't think Viserys would be. Viserys maybe would respond more decisively. And I don't think future kings learned from this lesson of the golden years of Viserys. I don't think, in addition to within their own time not figuring out that when things are good, you should look to the future. Doesn't really seem like a lot of Targaryen rulers in the future, or say Robert or anyone else, learned from that example. Like, for example, Aerys' reign early on was pretty good. Like, Ned even points out, like, when Aerys died, like, the realm, like, there were lots of, the crown was, coffers were full, and there'd been peace for a while, other than the Greyjoy rebellion, you know, it had been pretty good. But that was ruined by similar things, by a king going mad instead of a king having an extra family, and his heir being obsessed with prophecy a bit, which in this case Viserys was both of those things. Instead of going mad, he was losing his health, but he was a little bit obsessed with prophecy. So in that sense, there's a little bit of Rhaegar in Viserys, a little bit of Aenys mixed with Rhaegar, a little bit of a few other kings here and there, and a little bit of them, and there's a little bit of him in some of them as well.
You know, a lot of the things that Viserys and the people around him, a lot of the mistakes they made, kind of like you're saying, almost everyone could benefit from having done what they should have done, which is basically maintaining better relationships with each other. Basically, just like visiting your vassals, making sure they know the power that you have, and the power, and make sure they know that you know the power they have. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, like, I need you as an ally. I appreciate the grain that you produce, the soldiers in our army. You know, there needs to be this continued effort to maintain these relationships, so that when there's a change for some reason, it's not enough people. You have people on your side that know what you believe, you know what they believe, what they want. Everyone's needs are being met and realized and shared, and especially when you have dragons and you could just fly back and forth real quick to have these conversations
travel isn't even an issue.
with the tacit threat of don't rebel against me because I have a dragon coming with it. It seems like such a... The biggest thing I think that all these characters needed to do was visit the people in the realm, let them know who they were and what they were about, be on good terms with them, so that it's not this idea that Otto has that the lords of the realm won't accept a woman. Okay, well, go make them accept it. You know, like, go visit them,
see
make
how,
friends,
show them it'll work.
You know?
Show them why they're wrong. Yeah, that was really well said, Sean, because it's also touches back to what I said at the beginning. So well point, good said, all the praise, which is that Viserys' reign shows how much the personal matters. Even like the big political decisions obviously matter too, but this stuff matters. The stuff that he's left out of the history books for is actually really important. Like you said, you're right. Like the feudal system, like a lot of things, is based on relationships. They aren't relationships of equals a lot of times, but they're still relationships. And they're not like, and like you said, like some of these vassals are strong enough to push back violently, maybe, if the relationship isn't going well, and if enough of them join together, then it's a civil war. So yeah, you're right. It is about maintaining or reestablishing fixing whatever it takes to show the proper appreciation, show the proper respect, show things are going back and forth. You're right. That's the core of it. And relationships are super important. Viserys reminds us of that.
Theoretically, he's the king, and if he says something, everyone should do it. But clearly that's not the case. And he knows it's not the case. And Otto knows it's not. Like, they all realize that there's a limit on this authority. And so what do they do about that? They just sit around and hope. They don't. You need to go make sure that the authority is there is authorized. That the authority is authorized for whether it's through fear or friendliness or whatever it is. You can't just rest on your laurels, which you might do after 50 years of peace, but you also know you're about to shake things up by naming this woman as an heir. So you got to take a little more initiative to make sure it goes down okay.
Yeah.
And I think that was it. Rhaenyra could have done it on her own. Alicent, all these characters could have taken some responsibility for making sure this went smoothly, and it didn't. And it's not
now
going
we'll see.
smoothly. So
yeah, like that's a great point as well, because what did Joffrey say to Tywin? He said, like, they have to listen, I'm the king. And Tywin said, anyone who has to remind people that they're the king is no true king. And he's like, Aerys felt the need to remind people he was king too. It's like, okay. What's that one? What's that thing? Like, the worst person in the world just made a great point.
Oh, yeah,
like that.
yeah.
The person you hate just made a great point. Yeah, Tywin. Okay, Tywin, that's a great point. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, Tywin reminds us that it is about relationships. Yeah, it's like, okay, all right, Tywin's right. Stop clock. That whole thing. And you make it think, like, this is my last question. Make it think about this. Like, if power wasn't in the balance, that last scene with his family, that wouldn't have been hanging over them. This Iron Throne hanging over their head. When he says the Iron Throne is the most dangerous seat in the world, that's probably what he's talking about. Things like that, how it destroys relationships, destroys people, or does both simultaneously. It destroys relationships because it destroys people, or destroys people, which in turn destroys relationships. Chicken and the dragon egg, which is eventually going to result in ruin or violence or civil war. And so it's a very prophetic thing to say, oddly enough, discussing prophecy, but this is not prophetic. This is just like common sense. Like, if you do this enough, people will fight. So, yeah, going back to his family, that makes me a little like, yeah, this part of what he's having in his final moments, he's thinking to himself, man, if we weren't the royal family, we could just be having this dinner, and we wouldn't have this thing hanging over our heads, this Chekhov's Iron Throne over our, like, we could just hang out. It wouldn't be the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. It wouldn't be that situation. We could just have a family dinner, and maybe there'd be quibbles. All families have their problems, but it wouldn't be like we're all about to kill each other type problems. What would he be? Would he have been a maester? Would he have been, if he hadn't been king, would he have been, like, he would have spent more time with his models? That's my question. What would Viserys have been?
If he was still a Targaryen, but just didn't become,
if he was
still in his royal bloodline.
Yeah, if he had stayed far down in the line of succession.
Would have worked with the stonemasons. He would have been an artist, I think. No, I don't know. He actually, he said that he wasn't the one actually making a thing. He was designing it. He would have just, been an architect, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah,
some sort of creative, like,
he might have founded a school of art.
Yeah, he might. That's what I think.
Or history.
Yeah, her history, probably more so that is that he's doing that, not the artistic part of it, but the research to make it so that they could build the model. In other words, so history. But maybe he would have joined the Citadel.
Yeah, maybe
in another world he might have just been a scholar.
I said maester. That's certainly
he
possible,
loved the histories. Yeah,
he may not have been quite smart enough for it, but maybe.
Shade.
I mean, that was the problem for, like, what was his name, Andrew Farman. They were like, oh, yeah. It's like, no, he's just not smart enough.
I mean, like, Viserys can read and speak multiple languages, so I think he has to have a certain level of, like, he can't. I don't know.
He might not have, like, forged a lot of links, but he's probably competent enough.
Yeah. Someone's a city planner. Yeah, I like that.
and they needed some of that with no one paying attention to that. Like, except in Barth, like, make sure the city has fresh water, and Alysanne is the one who made that happen, and Septon Barth implemented it. Like, they needed that sort of initiative. More of that stuff. Yeah. Dean Brown says, I saw an interview where Paddy said as soon as he wed Aemma, he gave up going to the Street of Silk and such things. Oh, Paddy wed Aemma, not Viserys. This is scandalous. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, that makes sense. Notable, like, it's very in character with him. He's found the love of his life. He doesn't need to go do that anymore. I like it. Any final thoughts?
I think I'll just start putting memes on the screen, and we will make sure we get a cat from Sean by the end of this, because I promised people, for what it's worth.
Oh, she promised a cat.
Are we close enough to the end? I should go now?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll start.
I'm going to put meme. Just tell me say something to me, Sean, when you actually have the cat, because you're not going to be on screen. I'll switch back to you. But I'm going to start with some funny memes, including my favorite that I made this season, which was Ben Wyatt and Viserys. Do you think a depressed person could make this?
And that is exactly when Emma comes into the room, or when Allison comes into the room to be like, he's like, hello, Lady Allison. So thank you, Michael Klarfeld, for your wonderful work on our video and maps. Thank you, Bran Winslow, for our intro music and our intro progress, whatever you want to call it. It's so cool. Just our intro, yeah. Thanks you to all of you who are patrons and subscribers via Spotify, or if you send a donation through our website. There's lots of ways to support. We appreciate whichever of those you take, or if you just tell your friends, we appreciate that as well. Make sure to join us on Saturday for our next spoiler stream for House of the Dragon coverage. And I want to shout out some patrons while the memes continue. Don't marry your daughter's best friend or draw 25. He should have drawn 25. Yes. Oh, well. He just did not want to draw all those cards. Would have been better for the realm if he had just drawn a bunch of cards. Alas. Thank you to High Lord Jacob Hayes, the Doom Opal, Captain of the Shimmering Tide, Relentless as the Seas, and Hand of the King. Lord Giuliano of House U is Hand of Queen Ashea, known as the Omni Knight. Lord Jim the Fortuitous is of Wars and Politics of Ice and Fire blog, and he's Warden of the West. Lord George Stormsville the Cunning is Lord of Chiliad and Warden of the East. Kabeth the Unfrozen is Lord of the Bricks and Castle Crimson Light, Defender of the Old Gods, and Warden of the North. Lady Kelly McMath of Covington is Lady of the Villa Hills and Crescent Springs and Warden of the South. It's funny because I'm distracted from reading these because I want to see the memes, but I can't. I kind of can, but I'm like looking over here. Jenny the Just, captain of the ghost ship Liberty, which vanished in the Shivering Sea over a century ago, has been recently sighted near Volantis, if tales can be believed. King Beyond the Wall Sidney Jesse is the Fallborn, Lord of Blue Spring and the Haunted Forest, wields a dagger of Dragonglass and the Valyrian steel blade Red Frost. True story, King Beyond the Wall Sidney Jesse lent his Dragonglass dagger to Rhaenyra and Daemon for their marriage, but they gave it back to him covered in blood from their lips. It was very rude for them not to wash it off first.
Hey, real quick.
Oh.
I've got a cat here. I don't know how long it'll last.
Oh, look at that kitty.
That
look.
Oh,
the yawning cat. Yeah.
Oh, and the arm stretch. That's a good thing.
That is a good thing. That is a relaxed cat. So far, so good. Sea Lord Sean Gallagher is the Titan's Binger, owner of 9 Valyrian steel ears. White Walker patrons include Araya Flint of the Mountain Flints, captured by the Weeper, only to be raised in the Valley of the Milkwater, Blue Eyes, and Golden Memories. Alexander Greyblood says, first of the first men, now crowned in ice, called Silencebringer, Woodblinder, and the Snow of Night, wielder of the ice, forged greatsword, Pale Frost. Our small council includes Lord Taylor of House Linebury, Strength of Stone, Will of Iron, Master of Coin, Lord Chris B. of House Baelish, Always Keep Your Foes Confused, Master of Whisperers, Drowned Dan, Lord of House Windsor, Master of Karate, Friendship for Everyone, and Ships. Lord Goodkill McGee is ruler over Castle Yonder, or is ruler of Castle Over Yonder, rather, and Grand Maester Scotty rounds it out. Lords and ladies in their castles include Lady Direliz of Castle Naki, the Alpha Patron. The memes are returning now. Lord Dan of Red Mountains and Castle Great Bell is Breaker the Second Stone. Gregor the Toasty is Lord of the Bread Fort. Ashlyn Winter is the Hawk's-Eye, Lady of Castle Skyfall. The Lord of the Halls of Castle Hillcrest is wielder of the Valyrian steel machete Everglazed. Lord Bemmy Snugglebunny is Guardian Ranger of the Hidden 100-Acre Werewood, dual wielder of the Valyrian short sword Glorious Morning and Little Light Wise, Sharpshooter of the Werewood and Ironwood laminated longbow Todd Von Oben. When you fear things cannot get worse, Snugglebunny enters the fray. The Bastard of the Wolfswood is First Forester of the Old Gods, sworn to House Ironwood Werewood. Listen for the silence. Casey Stark is of House Acres. Peter Rivers is the Pale Dragon and heir to Bloodraven. Lady Mara of House Stark is Archmistress of Apothecaries and Woods Witch. Her castle features werewood doors with painted moons. Lena Snow is the Twilight Star, bastard daughter of Dane, wife of the Trickster, and Lady of Castle Rivia. Jason Stark is second son of the North, wielder of the Valyrian steel sword Bloodbath, Lord of Castle Whitewood. The chill is real. Suck-Ass Gamer is master of soap and clay. Aminda Pinkwolf is lady and ruler of Castle Whitefast. The ice emboldens. Lady Adeline of Sea Dragon Point is keeper of trees, warmth and frost. Lord Benjen is of House Hornwood. King's Justice is Sir Troy the Steady, wielder of the Valyrian steel blade Fate. Normally, Ashea reads her Queen's High Council, but she's busy memeing, so I will read Rabea Star Eyes, Lady of Waves and Mistress of Ships, Captain of the Iron Shadow Cat. In the shadows, we bear our claws. Have we moved past memes into cool?
Yeah, I just thought I'd just show some cool Viserys stuff that I had. Exactly. Yeah, there's the cane and his clothes, and this the concept art for his degradation and all that. It's amusing to me because he looks really funny in the young version. I'm like,
boy, that is really fading, isn't it? Grand Archmaester Rennie, whose rod and ring and mask are quartz crystal, is wielder of the Valyrian steel pen Fire and Ink. The Purple Lord Leo Anansi is master of whispers. Lady Wolfbird, mistress of the Eastern Rivers, is gatekeeper of the Northern Skies, daughter of the Silver Sea and master of coin. Lady Carlin Carey of Castle Stonesharp, whose horse is shod in Valyrian steel, is prime rider of the Rising Hills. And last but not least, our Kingsguard and Queensguard, Lord Commander Namian of House Darklin, the Night Slayer, Valyrian Sword Onyx Abyss, Sir Dean the White, Knight of the Black Star, Gregor Snow called Snowbear, a bastard of Winterfell, Vaughn of House Firster, Sigil is a mailed fist with extended forefinger and pinky on the light blue field. Visenya let us hold Dark Sister once. Sir Bateman, the Dark Knight. Sir Roland de Stark, Gunslinger Knight of the Winter Kings, back from a 20-year ranging to the lands of Always Winter to protect my King Aziz. Well, thank you. And Queensguard, Lord Captain Commander Haema Helminth, the Sellsword Sentinel. James the Green, Lord of the Meadows, Keeper of the Trial of Grasses. Amber the Adamant, the Knight of the Mist and Mother of Squids. The Wintry Wolverine, we finish what you begin. Nora Neko. Archmaester Vena, whose ring, rod, and mask are made of steel, not pudding. Laura Boros, Lady of Infinity. Lord Commander George the Golden Lord leads the Beard Guard, backed by Lady Rita of the Coppermane, the Unbound, Dance the Fervor. Sir Jeff, Warden of the AC, is wielder of Triad, the multifaceted beard of platinum, red, and brown. Stay frosty. And Bloody Ben Blackwood. Finally, our leaders of the Night's Watch, that includes Sir Richard, Lord Commander Richard, the Ligerheart, wielder of Barry's Anklebreaker, a flail with blue and silver Valyrian steel spikes, motto, go blue. First Builder Maegor Snow, a.k.a. Maegor the Cool, the Fire in the Snow. First Ranger Liam, a.k.a. Sir, waiting on a nickname. And First Steward Zach of House Wild, Lord Shredder of the Spiral, wielder of the Valyrian Steel Axe, Grail. That's it, everyone. If you want to get a cool nickname like that, jump on patreon.com, go to History of Westeros, and pick the level that's right for you. You also get things like access to scripts and notes and episodes early, fun stuff like that. We'll see you all on... Oh,
and Sean, you appeared on Daily DVR to talk about House of the Dragon, too. I don't think we shouted that out. Yeah, Sean. Yeah. Yes, again. Well, I've kind of said it. No.
Nice. Oh, yeah. Right on.
Whoops. Well, I had you muted for that. I'm so sorry, Sean. It was my bad. My bad. You were muted. I don't know if some people could maybe hear you, but a tiny bit. But the point was, we said that you were on Daily DVR podcast with Axel. And I kind of said the important part that they at least still got that.
Yeah,
they didn't hear what
check
you
out
said.
Sean on Daily DVR.
I did a whole season of coverage of Better Call Saul with Axel of Daily DVR. Not this past season, but the season before that. We covered it together, and so I can say firsthand that he's a great person to chat with. So I'm sure Sean and Axel talking about House of the Dragon is really interesting.
You might say they're friends of the show. Our shows are friends of each other. Yes. Okay, everyone. We'll see you next time. You know what to do. Valar reread us and Valar rewatch us.